take a look at assignment 4. So we'll navigate over to assignments, go to assign 4, and I hope you're taking a moment to read through the instructions. We're going to create the models on page A4. Models are 5 points each. There will be several techniques discussed, so I plan on doing at least a couple of these several times. The intent when we look at the models will be to give you options that you can choose from, and then there's always if you find a better way or want to strike out on your own, you can certainly do that and ask questions as to what worked and what didn't work. I'm not looking for perfect models yet. Develop your tool set, attempt to fully define sketches, get comfortable navigating the work area. This is all foundation material that push buttons, go through the process, and get prepared. So I have to add a link there. So since my link isn't working at this point, I will go through. Well, let me add the link. All right, we'll try that again. So create the models on page A4. And again, I'm putting these on separate pages because this expands out, has much better graphics than trying to include it in the assignment. So a few more comments. Again, create the models from the exercises just in case you come from a different starting point. Feel free to play, experiment, make mistakes, get close, and we'll build on the strategies and techniques to refine this process. So I mentioned rules of the game are take a look at this. We're going to build geometry that is close to this. If it doesn't come out exact, if you have problems with it, turn it in, we'll refine it. We'll build on this foundation material and improve as we go. All right, so this is a mix of kind of the first and second assignments. So exercise 614 is in metric, just kind of taking a look at the shape. When you first look at any of these exercises, let me see if I can zoom up on that a little bit. When you look at any of the exercises, whatever jumps out at you as the best place to start is usually the best place to start. Things like the limit dimension, right? So we have an upper and a lower limit. Those dimensions we're not overly concerned with. Looking at the shape, this front profile will be of my first concern, and then we'll go back and add holes, slots, fillets after the fact. So this is a building process where we start off with a piece of geometry, then we remove some material, maybe we add some more material. In previous videos, I've been fond of saying this is not name that tune where you have to create everything in one feature, one sketch. If it takes 2 or 3 sketches and you build on that geometry, that will work out just fine. All right, so our overall 107, height of 41, depth of 48, and then radiuses for the arcs. So fly that out a little ways. See if I can get it a little closer. Maybe not. All right, so since we're going into a new assignment, we'll pick our new part metric. And position just a little bit better here. All right, so the first assignment, we drew in extra geometry, extra objects in our sketch. So this time I'm just going to go front plane, sketch, and then as we start to draw this geometry, one of the things that you will encounter is called a continuous arc. So if you're comfortable with the the strategy, then go ahead and use it. If not, you can switch over to the arc command, and on the upper we'll do that. At some point you will accidentally on purpose do this, so what happens is you're in the line command, you're drawing the line, you happen to go back past the start point. So as soon as you cross through that start point, it switches to arc, and the tangent arc is going to have multiple solutions depending on which way you drag. Right, so I can always go back to that start point and drag a new arc. Well, most of the time it will go the way I want it. Alright, so we had this solution a little earlier, and the advantage here is that once I place the arc, I'm right back into the line command and can continue with my line. Alright, the other requirement, or other not requirement, is you do not have to go all the way around this part. As a habit or a tendency, I want to go all the way around, but let's go ahead and just take these first few items. I will go ahead and put another vertical so I can utilize it. Right, and then we'll put in the 107, should auto scale, and the outside was 41. Okay, we'll try that again, 41. And the arc radius of 30 was to the outside, and we have a thickness of 11, so that would give me 19. Alright, so I'm not sure I'm going to use that dimension just yet, but I do want to have it there for reference. So let's fly, see if I can control my views here. Let's go ahead and fly that in. And then as far as position, we have to be kind of careful that when we're looking at these dimensions, I get tripped up on them pretty regularly, where the baseline to the center of the arc is 51, and then they carry the holes over another 43. So it's not exactly centered, but I do have to realize what datum we're generating this geometry from. So from the line to the arc, and again I would prefer that you use the perimeter or the circumference of the arc as opposed to going to the center point. So right click and select, or hitting escape on the keyboard will allow me to be back in selection mode. With the dimensions, kind of hard to tell. The endpoint is black, endpoint black, the object is black. That's fully defined. On the other end, I am coincident with the origin, so that endpoint will be in black. The line object is in black, but the endpoint is in blue. That means that it can move, and because of the vertical relation and those constraints that we've applied, it can only move up and down. Okay, so we're going to come over, and I said we were going to use I guess we'll use a center arc here. I'm going to go ahead and put the 11 dimension on. Gives me the thickness. Now I can see that I have a new blue endpoint to move. This endpoint goes to black because of the relation in the dimensions. We're going to go to center point arc, and since these are concentric, then I will drag out till it finds the endpoint and then drag through. Alright, so as I'm left clicking and holding down, if you are a clicker, then you'll click, let go, bring it over to the direction you want, click again to position it, and then I'm going to right click to select, and then back into line, up and over, and had a little stutter there, so let's go ahead and get rid of one of those. So this is one of those situations that have a gap. You know, I hit a bump on my mouse pad, or let go of the mouse, had a twitch, would get rid of one of the objects, because if I were to bring this one over and connect it, I'm going to see that blue dot as the endpoint, but that's not going to get me to fully defined. Right? And I could, let's go ahead and hit Control Z. I could connect the dots, but that really doesn't do anything as far as geometry. It's not very clean, so I wouldn't, that's not going to be a best practice. Best practice is going to be highlight the object we don't think we need and hit delete, and then we'll drag that endpoint over and connect it. Alright, so we have a radius of 30. Right, and if I was to add one more relation or dimension, I can go between the arcs, but keep in mind that this is going to create a conflict. So this is where things get overdefined or not solvable. So I place the 11. You want to make the dimension driven? Yes, otherwise it is going to cause an overdefined condition. I want to see that value of 11. I can apply it, it's there, but notice that its extension line is in gray, and if we double click on it, it's a driven dimension. It's not participating the same way that the 19 and the 30. So if I wanted to include that one, we have parameters on each of these dimensions. So if I click the 19 and come over to other, I can switch it to driven, or I could go ahead and delete it. I could delete both of these and reapply. And for the 11, if I want it to be driving, then I'm going to uncheck the driven. And now it's the primary value, and the 19 is the secondary value. All right, so you have the ability to swap these out. It's a little bit faster, maybe makes a little more sense. Let it develop for you, and just keep it in the toolbox for future reference that these options are available to you. All right, so this object moves up and down my line, so I can select and then Control select another line, and that would be collinear. So collinear. If we happen to grab an endpoint and the line, then we would be looking at coincident. So notice collinear and those other relations aren't available on this selection. So depending on what combination you select, those are the relations that are going to be available. And at this point, there's not any relation that's going to be better than the other. So fly this back in just to make sure we have a consistent thickness of 11. So I want to maintain that 11 distance. So in this case, I'm going to select Control Select. So select the first line, hold down the Control button, and select the second line. Over on the relations, since I missed the pop-up, we'll go ahead and just come over to the Property Manager and set. So the one issue would be the 11 for the radius. There's other things that we can do to align those, but if I keep in mind that the 11s have to match up, making an adjustment on thickness is not really a big deal. All right, so our thickness, or our depth, is 48. So features, extrude boss base, and the choices. We'll put in the 48, blind in condition coming towards us, reversing the direction, or double clicking. I think it was double clicking the arrow. Single clicking the arrow sends it to the to the opposite z. It's not really positive and negatives. Horizontals and verticals are more in line with the sketches, and whether it's coming towards us or going away from us is a matter of the way you see the model. And so we have the blind in condition. I can also switch up to midplane. And I'm limited in my choices because this is the first object. There's not really anything to work with. So we create this this solid. I'm going to stay with midplane. There are several items that end up going through the center of the part or are related to the middle of the part. So midplane has some advantages. If you go with the blind in condition towards you or away from you, that'll be fine as well. All right, next piece of geometry, let's go for the slot. Slots are always kind of interesting. I tended to overthink them. So I'm going to highlight that face and hit Control-8 on the keyboard so that I'm normal to that face. And then we need to open up the sketch. So rather than going up to the cam manager, I can always go to the command manager and click sketch, which is highlighted. If I just click sketch, then it's going to ask me where I want to sketch, and I'm going to hit escape to clear that. Fastest and probably the best workflow is just to right click, and edit sketch will take you into sketch 1, and sketch is creating a new sketch. So it opens up that face, it goes normal 2. Well, we're already normal 2. And for that slot geometry, I'm going to draw a corner rectangle, picking on the edge to get coincident, and then just drag it out some distance. So when we're looking at these relations, I'm going to have a coincident. The other side, not so much. The rectangle automatically puts in a horizontal, a vertical, a horizontal, and a vertical. So to center this, I'm going to right-click and select midpoint. Once I've selected the midpoint, then I can Control-select the edge and make those midpoints, or midpoint to midpoint. We have a width of 13. So at this stage, practice that right-click. Depending on where you are on the screen, what has been selected, you're going to get different combinations of values. So you may not see the select midpoint if you're on the face or if you're out in the work area. It has to be tied to an object. All right, so those are only really the commands that you can use are going to show up. All right, so I selected the line. I placed the dimension. We're entering a value of 13, and that gives me the depth. And then I'll right-click and select. We'll apply that back in. From the base, it has a center of 25. I don't really need this line, but I don't want to delete it. So our object geometry can become construction by going over to the property manager and clicking for construction, or toggling out of the pop-up construction geometry. So again, centerline, construction geometry are the same thing. I'm going to put in a tangent arc. So for a tangent arc, I would start at the endpoint and we'll drag around to the other endpoint. And if we move and there's no separation or odd movement in the where the arc contacts the line, then it made it to defined. And from the bottom edge to the arc is 25. Okay, we'll check that dimension. And in effect, the midpoint overrides the need for the 24. If you want to have those values, build in those dimensions. I'm really trying to emphasize the relations and what you can do with the relations. If you want to stay with the dimensions, that's okay for building out the shapes. So I'm holding down the middle mouse button and rotating the part around. Looking at that depth, the through all is going to go through my center geometry. So let's take a look at that end condition when we perform an extrude cut. And I'll rotate around again. So blind end condition, we could set a value of 11, but if the thickness of the part changes, then we're going to have to come back and adjust the cut extrude as well. Through all goes all the way to the last piece of geometry, and you can see the intersection where it will remove material out of the center of the part. So this is an instance where up to next or up to surface, up to vertex would be good choices. Up to next is probably the easiest. It just finds that next face and terminates the extrude there. All right, what do we want to put in next? There is a hole of 5 millimeters through the center of the part. So let's go to the top plane. All right, so since it's in the center, top plane is a good choice. The bottom of the part would be a good choice. Yeah, those would be okay choices. These two faces, not great, but okay. All right, so whether I go with the top plane or the bottom of the part, and then notice that picking the bottom of the part rotated into orientation into that face, where the top plane probably would have showed me the top of the part. All right, so for my sketch, I'm going to find that inference line. The blue line is telling me that I'm horizontal. I'm going to go right into the smart dimension, 5 millimeters. And we know that the center was 51. All right, so I can apply that dimension, but I have another tool. We seem to always have another tool at our disposal. And this one is under the hide show items. We can turn on a temporary axis. On the temporary axis, any arc automatically generates a temporary axis, and I can make my center point. So in this case, I do want my center point, and hold down the control button, select the temporary axis. I could go midpoint, but I want to illustrate the coincidence. So if I went midpoint, it should be the same length as the arc. If I go coincident, it positions, but allows the circle to move. If I hold down, I've selected the center mark, and if I hold down the control and select the origin and go horizontal, that's going to cause my sketch to go fully defined. All right, and then we'll go back to view to clean up after and turn the temporary axis off. You may have noticed that there was also a blue line where this arc was generated over here. All right, so we can still see, because of the relation, we can still see that temporary axis for reference, but the rest have been turned off. So again, let's go with an end condition other than blind. We'll go to through all. Through all finds this is the terminating face, but it's not interfering or going to take too much geometry, so we'll go ahead and complete the hole. All right, we have two holes that are diameter of 10 and 22 millimeters apart. So they'll be on this face. In contrast to drawing the circle, these could be circles, but I want you to get used to and recognize the hole wizard. So coming up to the command manager, looking at the hole wizard, or picking on a face and pressing the S key, we're going to find that same icon for the hole wizard, and pop-up from the S key on the keyboard. Right, so we'll deal with the S keys a little bit more as we go. Right, so it is a simple hole. We're going to go to ANSI metric. The type is, this is not a dowel pin. We're not setting clearances or press fits or anything like that. So under dowel holes, or when we do the pull down next to dowel holes, we're going to get drill sizes, helicoils, so threaded inserts, screw clearances, and tap drills. So if we had an M10 bolt or socketed cap screw, then we would set for clearance. We probably have a number 8, and so, or we have something else going through there. So we'll just go with drill sizes, and then underneath the size, we'll scroll down and pick for, once I find it, a diameter of 10. End condition is through all. You can show the custom sizing. Use the changing the dimension very sparingly. If you have other choices, use those other choices first, because changing that dimension will not affect the description, where in the feature manager, all we're going to see is a diameter 10 through hole. It's not going to be what you changed it to. Okay, so through all, typically not going to do near side countersinks, far side countersinks. For a standard edge break or deburr, if there's something a little bit heavier for whatever reason, then we can add those in. For positioning then, we'll place the first. Because the face was pre-selected, I don't get that asking, do you want a 3D sketch? At this stage, no, we don't want 3D sketches. Going to place the first one, and then I would like to mirror this to make them symmetrical. All right, so we can go to line, and if I draw a center line, notice that for construction was selected. We can go all the way through the part. And one note of picking at what would be the midpoint of the arc, if something happens to that slot, if I remove that cut extrude feature that created that slot, I know I'm going to get an error for that endpoint. It's not hard to correct, but you have to be aware of the selections that you're making, implications further down the line. So chances are there's not going to be any issue with the slot. That's as good as. Finding the midpoint for the arcs. All right, I could do the math that said 51 plus 43. So coming off the outside edge to the center of our arc, and then 43 to the center line of the holes. If I create that center line in reference to the arc, then I can go right to 43. All right, so select. Keep in mind that the hole wizard is only that point. We'll take a quick look at what kind of geometry is generated. The circle is just for reference here. So when you're sketching, pick the perimeters. When you're in the hole wizard, you can pick the point. So when I go to mirror this entity, if I just select mirror, the entity to mirror will be the point. The mirror about will be the center line that I drew. There are other geometries that are available for the mirror about. Most of the time, go ahead and create your center point. Another technique, and probably my preference for workflow, is to pre-select. So select the point, hold down the control button, mirror entities, and it automatically goes to the mirror. Has enough in the selection to find a solution. And then the last one would be, if I just pick the center line and go into mirror, well, it didn't quite put it where I wanted it. So if I were to just grab the object that I want mirrored and tell it mirror entities, I could go on selecting objects and then come back to the mirror about. Also notice there is a checkbox for copy. Just like the copy and paste from the sketch objects that we ran into in assignment 3, typically you're not going to want to uncheck the copy because you're going to lose relations. You're going to have to reapply dimensions or other relations that were part of that mix. So there's other ways to deal with the geometry if you really don't want to copy it. All right, so let's go ahead and select. We'll put in 22. And because we have the mirror relation, we know the position of the center line. Mirror is going to be symmetric across that center line, so it is automatically dividing the 11 and the 11 to get our number. Okay, so we have the position. We have all of our major geometry, and as a as kind of a last feature, then we'll go to the fillets. All right, so the interior fillets are a radius of 2. There is a radius of 5 on the outside and radius of 13 on the very far outside. So let's go with the inners. So radius of 2. And then select, control select, fillet, radius of 5. And then select, control select. All right, and I am picking edges because to pick the face means that everything connected to that face gets the fillet. So if I'd pick this face 2 millimeters along the edges, if it could find that tangent edge, it would carry up all the way around, and it would also do the holes. All right, and then 13 on the outside. Okay, so that completes the part. We're going to go back through at least the first part of this with another strategy. Also, I mentioned the limit dimension, and I just put in the 19 for the radius, the 11 for the thickness. This is an actual tolerance value, so we're going to come back and revisit that in this next go around. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and save this. This is exercise 614. So let's go ahead and save. And navigate back to my folder. Okay, so I lost my folder, so a quick way to, since we've been saving to the same location, a quick way to figure out where those files were going is to come back to Open Recent, and then we'll just hover over any of the previous. So I was putting these on my OneDrive, so let's go save, and it was on OneDrive somewhere, and then there's the 2018. All right, so assignment 2, assignment 3. Let's go ahead and do assignment 4. And we said that this was 614. I try not to put periods in, so if you want, you can do the underscore or dash 614. You could also name these as the frame guide. You know, whatever makes the most sense. All right, so there's my first version. All right, so in contrast, when we started with the sketches, we can also do contours and regions. So when it goes into just the outside geometry, notice that our sketch is kind of the standard sketch icon. There's not anything shared between features, and may not even have a share with this next group. So I'm going to create a new part metric, and the contours and region has an advantage in that I can set envelopes. If I decided that I wanted the center of the arc at the part, and there my fingers are getting ahead of me again. If I wanted the arc at the middle of the part, we can kind of move around and make some different choices. So setting up the envelope, we're going to go 107 by 41, and that's just going to be a rectangle. And I want to emphasize too that last time we started at the origin, it doesn't have to be a corner that starts at the origin to set that definition. An object, and so I selected my line, control selected my origin, make midpoint. That gives me my first definition. And then we go to the 107, and then I can set to 41. So 41. All right, so contours and regions. Again, we can draw this in and go back and trim it out, but it isn't really necessary. I can utilize my geometry so it goes a little bit faster, even though it's maybe a little bit more to look through and to deal with. So we have the radius of 30, and then for limit dimensions, and this is kind of why I waited on discussing limit and tolerances, is we're always going to go to maximum material condition. When in doubt, maximum material condition is the better choice. Oh, and since that was a radius, and my first clue was that my 38 got bigger than my 30, so when I checked the dimension, yep, sure enough, it was a radius. I have an option there where we can go ahead and say set it to 60, but if I want to see it as an actual radius, since it's a circle, it's going to default to diameters. If it was the arcs, then it would default to the radiuses. Over on my property manager, the values are set, and under leaders, I can switch between a radius and the diameter or a linear dimension. So I'm going to switch to radius, and that'll show the radius of 30. And then we're given the diameter of 38 point, actually that is the maximum or least material condition. All right, so 37.97, we're kind of split. Let's see, that would be 310 over. That's an interesting number, but all right, so 37.97 is actual. The smaller number on an interior is going to leave the most material. 97. If we were on the outside, maximum material condition would be the largest number, and that would be the most material remaining. All right, so a couple of lines at 11. And a couple of dimensions. I'm not going to worry about making those equal or doing anything at this point with my two objects. All right, so plus side is I generated this pretty quickly. It's not really sloppy. It's fully defined, but it is busy. Let's just call it busy. We're going to go ahead and extrude. One quick comment on trim. So bring it back to Control 1, back over to the Sketch tab. When you're trimming entities, stay with the trim to closest, power trim, whatever you drag over. And what trim close is going to do is whatever you pick is going to go away. So you could go remove all these lines, but it isn't really necessary. And if there's geometry that we're going to add later, there's unknowns. Our magic crystal ball of design intent is a little bit cloudy today that we may want to add or take away or make changes. Having this extra geometry isn't going to hurt anything. It may not help anything. But we might be able to utilize it for something else later on. So extrude, and I'm going to stay with the midplane, and the dimension was 48, and then when we select contours and regions, let's bring this back, notice that whatever highlights, so if I pick the rectangle, I'm going to get a rectangular prism. I start picking regions, then I'm going to get those regions. So what I would want to watch out for, what would be a concern, is maybe this crosses the line and there's a little tiny sliver that needs to be included. Don't be shy about zooming up, finding those other geometries, those potential missing geometries. So downside concern for the contours and regions, there are areas that can get overlooked or missed, and you want to do your best to make sure that doesn't happen. All right, so I'm back to the same location. Let's do a slightly different on the face. I mentioned that we can dimension to the arc, so I'm going to use the continuous arc again. So we have the line. I'm still in the line command. I'm going to go back to that start point and drag out to finish my arc. Back into the line. And I could use this as an open profile. This open profile will cut, but we would either have to give it a blind in condition that would have a value of 11, or use the through all, which would break through the part. So making this a closed contour is still going to be the best bet. All right, Control 8. Now the thing to watch out for with tangencies, well, let's go ahead and define this a little bit more. That did pull up the tangency. I'm going to go ahead and highlight that tangency and delete it for the example. You don't need to do that. Okay, so let me go ahead and get a dimension on it. Find my edge, 25 and 13. So if I picked the arc in this case, it would have given me it would have given me the radius as opposed to all the way across. And then we had a dimension of 24, so that positions it. All right, so the thing to watch out for is, since that tangent I removed was controlling the blend, if I can go to a sharp where that arc meets the vertical line, then that's going to be an indicator that we're missing a tangency. All right, once I add it, the sketch goes back to fully defined. Features, extrude cut, and through all. Oh, let's try up to next. Now let's go to up. We used up to vertex previously. Let's use an up to surface. Any of these up tos, for the most part, are going to require a second selection. So I pick the surface, and it will terminate at that surface. Depending on the geometry, it may actually follow the curvature or build out that additional geometry. All right, so I mentioned if we sketch on the face, now that that is my center, I can put the 5mm hole in. And before we use the hole wizard, for the 10 millimeter, we're going to discuss planning your planes a little bit to where we can have one sketch with these multiple geometries. Alright, so to get my circles, when I pick the perimeter, and I don't want to mirror, well, I already drew the circles, so I don't need to mirror. If I were to mirror, I would be mirroring one on top of the other. So I'm going to use a symmetric command. So preference is to go with the perimeters. Let's watch what happens if I were to just go to the center marks. The centers will be symmetric, so they'll move together, but notice that the diameters are going to be different. So let's Control Z, and watch the Control Z's because it will back out far enough to change your last dimension, which is kind of annoying. Alright, so that symmetric's still there, so I'm just going to highlight it and delete it and replace it with the perimeter. And so it's a select, Control Select, symmetric. Now they move together and the diameters are the same. So we have a diameter of 10, a distance of 22, a distance, we can go from the origin. Just be careful of the point to point from the origins, because that linear distance would in effect allow a certain amount of orbiting, depending on what the other dimensions and relations are capable of doing. So that was either 41 or 43. I think it was 43. And that puts it in position. Alright, so my sketch plane is kind of through the middle of the part. So if we extrude cut, then everything is going down. And we can tell it to go through all or up to next. But this would be one of those cases where I'd want to use through all both. Alright, so this is going, the two holes are going to give me an end condition that terminates through the material. The small hole is going to give me an end condition that terminates through the material going up. Alright, so as long as it meets that there is something to cut condition, then the cut extrude will perform okay. Alright, and I started with the smallest radiuses last time. There really shouldn't be any difference. So instead of going up to the command manager, we'll go over to the pop-up, find the fillet, and you can use the pop-up boxes. Not sure why it's coming up with 10 decimal places, but there they are. And right-click to OK. And fillet. Go 5 on this one. Enter. Right-click to accept. Left-click. Select, Control Select. And 13. Right-click to accept. Alright, so same part, same geometry, differences, contours and regions. Sometimes contours and regions are going to make sense for your part. For the assignment, pick one. You don't have to do both of these. You can do both of them, but I'd still say pick your favorite method and run with it, so that you go through the process. Just be aware that there are others available. So let's see, what do I want to do this one? I'll do CR, contours and regions, initials. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and stop the video here. Our next project will be back into the to the sketching. We're going to go a little bit different route with it and pick up with that next time.